Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Raghavji on Vichara Sangraha. I would now request Narayanji at the shrine to initiate with puja. Sir.
Om Achyutāya Namaha, Om Anandāya Namaha, Om Govindāya Namaha. Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shasivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadaram Dhyaye Sarvabhighnopaupasante. Ayamurta Samusargosugam Mando no Kranando Ayamurta Samusardostu Tadeva Lagnam Sadinam Tadeva Taravalam Chandranam Tadeva Vidyavalam Devabalam Tadeva Lakshmi Pate Tengriyam Smarami Om Om Suva Om Maha Om Jana Om Tava Om Satyam Om Tatsodharvavanyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Yo Yo Na Prachodayat Om Abha Jyotir Samradam Brahmoswaram. ममोपात समस्त युद्ध हैत्वरासी परमेश्वर चित्तम करिष्यमानस्य कर्मणः निर्वेणेन प्रसृतत्तम माधव विघ्नेश्वरं कर्ष्ये पृथ्व्या मेरुटु ऋषि सुरतं चंद्रवर्मो देवता पृथ्वी दिया त्रिदा लोकादयितं विष्णुनाथदा स्वयं सचारे मां देवी पवित्रं गुरुशासनम् आगमार्थं तु देवानां कमनार्थं तु रक्षकं गंडारवं कराम्यादौ देवदवाननाञ्जनम् नमोपात समस्त दुर्ग हैत्वरासी परमेश्वर की चेतम निर्बंध सिद्ध्यत माधव विघ्नेश्वर पूजां कर्ष्ये गणानां गणपतिगुं नमामहे कविं कवीनां सत्तरवं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पद आनुशृण्वन्तु सीदसादनम् अस्मिन् दर्शनाबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमासनं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये मध्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये पाद्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमास्मन्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः उपसारिकस्नानं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरमास्मन्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातुम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः गंधा धारयामि समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये गंधोपर्यक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः अलंकरणार्थमक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः कुंकुमं समर्पयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि। ओम सुमुखाय नमः ओम एकदंताय नमः ओम कपिलाय नमः ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः ओम लंबोदराय नमः ओम विघटाय नमः ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः ओम विनायकाय नमः ओम धूमकेतवे नमः ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः ओम बालचंद्राय नमः ओम गजाननाय नमः ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः ओम एरंगाय नमः ओम स्कंदपूर्जवाय नमः ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः ओम शंकरमोक्षविनायकरे नमः ओम आतुपुरविनायकरे नमः ओम महागणपतिये नमः नानाविधपरिमलपत्रपुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षरां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं अमृतोऽस्तु अमृतं स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा, अपानाय स्वाहा, ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा, ओम उदानाय स्वाहा, ओम समानाय स्वाहा, ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतये नमः, महागणपतये नमः, महागणपतये नमः। उडगंड नाट्यचक्र नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतोपसान्तुत्रावसं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नमो नमो गणेशाय नमस्ते सर्वमणे निर्विघ्नं गुरु मे कार्यं नमांसं गजानन अगजाननपद्मार्कं गजाननं महार्निशम् अनेकदन्तं भक्तानाम् एकदन्तम् उपास्महे। महागणपतये नमः, महागणपतये नमः, महागणपतये नमः। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि। वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं शिरसा प्रणमामि। ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम वः ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम अवधूतमृतं ब्रह्मस्वराम् नमोपात समस्त दुर्दशात्वाराति परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम शुभे शोभने मुहूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय परार्थे त्रिवेदे वराह कल्पे वैवस्वतमन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे वादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाप्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रभवादीनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शोभदृतुनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे वसंत ऋतु मेषमासे शुक्लपक्षे दशमी तिथियां शुभतिथौ भानुवासरयुक्तायां पूर्व फल्गुनी नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभयोग शुभकर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां दशमी तिथियां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म पाप जन्म पप्रति एतच्चन पर्यन्तं मध्ये संभाविधानं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य अवनोदनार्थम् अस्माहं सहकुटुम्बानां क्षेम सद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्तमङ्गलाभ्यर्थं समस्तदुर्गोपशान्त्यार्थं रमणमहर्षेः प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्यसिद्ध्यर्थं रमणमहर्षेः पूजां करिष्ये। तदङ्गं कलशपूजां च करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। सोमनाथे शयनाय पुनरागमनाय च। कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाजितः मूले तत्र चित्तो ब्रह्मा मातृगुणे समृद्धा कुशस्तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तत्रिभाव सुन्दरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो प्रातर्मण गङ्गैः सैन्मेन गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे शुद्ध कावेरी जलिस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु अङ्गैः सहिता सर्वे कलशाम्बु समाजिता आयान्तु देवपूजार्थं दुर्दशकारगा। तंबूरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णु विष्णु करे देव से पूजित देवे पांजलि नमोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रोक्त जीव देवस्थानन अंजान निर्माल्यम स्वयं भवने पूजियेत ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्ति युक्ताय योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिगुरुमाय नमः आनंदाय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दश दिग्बालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राणप्रतिष्ठामन्तस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिदिक् सामधर्माणि सन्तांसि सकल जगत्सि सम्मार्गारिणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम कीलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंदर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिभ्यां नमः हरिं वनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करतलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रताय नौषट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्थ बोधोलिस तरुणसौरकराब्जे वासबोधंडमिक्षुप्त मणिगुणपंचबाणात् विप्राणस्य कवालंतरेण नवसौरोट्या देवी बालार्गोणा बहुसुदरी प्राणशक्तिपरान ओम आम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं माम आम्यं रं गं वं सं सं हंस स्वं स्वं हंस अस्यामूर्तौ दिवदुष्टो अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्वस्वत्र दिव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद वायुपुष्टानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुखं शिरं दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा ओमस्य श्रीप्राणप्रतिष्ठामन्तस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिदिक् सामधर्माणि सन्तांसि सकल जगत्स्थिति सम्मार्गारिणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राणदृष्टाभ्यां नियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंदर्जनीभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिभ्यां नमः हरिंदष्टिकाभ्यां नमः रोम कर्णपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वसट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्व दिग्बंध असुने दे पुनस्माक्ष सक्त पुनः प्राणमे नोजय भोगम योग पश्यमि सूर्यमुक्ति आवाहितो भव सत्ताभितो भव सन्निहितो भव सन्निहितो भव अवकुण्ठितो भव सुब्रतो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानगं तावत् ध्वंसभावेन लिम्बेऽस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवी सत्यं सत्यं दोषं प्रसन्नामि अमृतं स्वाहा ओम प्राणे स्वाहा वाणे स्वाहा व्याने स्वाहा उदाने स्वाहा समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः कात्याय मुरुगाय नमो देवानि सुब्रह्मण्याय स्वामिनाथने दक्षिणामूर्ति नटराजा भैरवानंदी महेश्वराय शिव पार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय नमः पुनः नाट्य चक्र निवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपस्थान सूत्राभूतं नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनं ब्रह्मास्मनीयं समर्पयामि recite Bhagavan's Ramnostotra. श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः अपार शक्ति सुखवारी राशोर्य शोर्मी मात्रं भुवनं समस्तं व्याजितं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविनीनं हृदि चिन्तयामि ओम महासेन महोसेन जाताय नमः ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः ओम मौजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगद्विदावताराय नमः। ओम श्री भूमिनादास्तज्योतिदाय नमः। ओम पराशर पुरोतंसाय नमः। ओम सुंदरात्मजवत्फलाय नमः। ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः। ओम सयायाम्बाय सयायवते नमः। ओम शोणाकुल महोलीन मानसाय नमः। ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः। ओम श्रीमद्वादशान्त महास्त्रे दत्तविद्योदयाय नमः। ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ओम परमार्थविदे नमः। ओम दिव्यराय नमः। ओम पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः। ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः। ओम पितुरादेशोणशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोमयाय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साहाय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः। ओम शांतसंकल्प संभ्रमाय नमः। ओम सुसुमृते नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तमश्शवीर सर्वंगाय नमः। ओम पुल्लांबुज विलोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रिका सुधात्री मंडिलानिल मंडलाय नमः। ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः। ओम सूर्यदाखिल विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तत्वज्ञाय नमः। ओम चिन्मुत्रणे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिगाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः। ओम विराजक सदाकृतिये नमः। ओम उच्चित नयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदासन तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणास्य निवाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईत्याय नमः। ओम भूमविद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम रुजमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समत्रुषे नमः। ओम सत्यत्रुषे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुवासने नमः। ओम दयार्णवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोणासुर इरुद्भूत स्कंदासुर निवेदनाय नमः। ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेशने नमः। ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिपूजाय नमः। ओम गणेश मुनिप्रिय सेविताकृसरोरुवाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि वृंद संसिन्न संशयाय नमः। ओम वर्णाश्रम मदादीनाय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मवदे नमः। ओम सर्वावनि मदस्थानां आराध्याय नमः। ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ओम आत्मारामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः। ओम विनदाय नमः। ओम विनुदाय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः। ओम दर्शनादक सम्मारिणे नमः। ओम मौरेण स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः। ओम निर्चाद्विकर्तानित्याय नमः। ओम प्रणानंदमोचकाय नमः। ओम अन्नस्थिरचण्डांशवे नमः। ओम संसारार्मतारकाय नमः। ओम सोणादिनिष्ठरे नमः। ओम आर्तविद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अविच्युत निज प्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नैसर्गिक महातमसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः। ओम शुभ्रगौबीरवसनाय ॐ गुहाय नमः, ॐ दण्डपाणये नमः, ॐ कृपापूर्णाय नमः, ॐ पवरोगपिशक्वराय नमः, ॐ स्कन्दाय नमः, ॐ देवदमाय नमः, ॐ अमर्त्याय नमः, ॐ सेनान्ये नमः, ॐ पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। कार्तिकेयाय नमः, मुरुगाय नमः, वल्ली दैवाने नमः, सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः, स्वामीनाथने नमः, दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः, नटराजने नमः, भैरवरे नमः, नंदिमहेश्वराय नमः, शिवपार्वतीये नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः। हरि ओम. Now let us all recite Upadesha Saram. कर्तुराज्ञया कापदे फलम् कर्मगिम्बरं कर्मदज्जडं कृतिमहदतो वदनकारणं फलमसात्मकं गदनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेचया कृतं सिद्धतोदकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवान्मन कार्यमुत्तमं भोजनं च चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतै सदी युग्धसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवा दुर्जमन्तद सिद्धजं जव ध्यानमुत्तमम् आद्यधारया श्रोदसासमम् सरलचिन्तनं विरलदबरं वेदभावना सौवमित्यसौ भावनापिता भावनीमदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुस्तले मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगो दाच निश्चितम् वायुरोदना लीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोधसाधनम् सिद्धवायव सित्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्द्वयी शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदम्बुनर् भवति नो मृदम् प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नासमेत्यद नष्टमानसो गृष्टयोगिन कृत्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं सिद्धमात्मन सिद्वदर्शनं तद्वदर्शनं मानसं दुहिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति किनवद ऐपदत्यहं निजविचारणम् अहमिनाकवा यहमहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिक्यमन्वहम् अहम विलीन के अप्यल्य सत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नाम से कस दच्चडम सस सत्ववासिगा चित्ववेदरा श्रद्धया इति सिद्धयायहम् ईश जीवयोर् वेशति विदा सस्वभावदो वस्तु केवलम् वेश आनद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईश दर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचित् ज्ञानमस्तिगिं नादुमन्तरम् किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णसित्सुखम् बन्धमुक्त्यधि तम्बरं सुखम् विन्ददीयधि वस्तुदैविग अहमवेदकम् निजविमानकम् महतितं तवो रमणवागियम् महतितं तवो रमणवागियम् महतितं तवो रमणवागियम्.
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Raghavji on Vichara Sangraha or self-inquiry. This consists of a series of questions posed by the devotee between 1900 to 1902 and handwritten answers by Bhagavan. The topics include both the core practice of self-inquiry as well as practices supportive or helpful for self-inquiry. Thus, the needs for diverse types of spiritual aspirants are addressed by Bhagavan. These answers, which we shall be studying, constitute the earliest set of instructions given by Bhagavan in his own handwriting. We will be guided by Sri Raghavji, a long-time devotee of Bhagavan and a resident near the ashram. Raghavji, I would now be able to take.
ॐ वन्दे श्रीरमणश्रेः आचार्यस्य पदाब्जं यो मे दर्शयतीशं भान्तं भान्तमतीत्य ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः. Namaste. Welcome to another session of study of Vichara Sangraha, Bhagavan's earliest set of question and answers. So for those of you who are joining in, let's say from the middle of these series of lectures, let me just mention that we are studying the 11th question today. We have studied the first 10 of these questions, which are highly focused and very deep questions coming from a very senior, so to speak, sadhaka who had already been on the path. And Bhagavan very lucidly and very clearly answers those questions. So we are in the 11th of these 40 questions posed to Bhagavan. So in the last session, we had seen how Bhagavan mentions that all creation ultimately is traced to the mind itself. When that word mind is understood in a holistic sense, not just as a faculty sitting in this limited body. So I'd explain that Bhagavan adopts what is known as the Drishti Srishtivada, where that formless consciousness with avidya takes on and projects this magical three-dimensional world. And then as a person discriminates what is real and what is not real, and his faculties of ideation, his mind becomes more and more clear, it becomes clear to him, that aspirant, that all that exists is merely an illusory projection. It doesn't have an independent reality or existence apart from I, the self or consciousness. And so this very straightforward and at the same time profound model of creation is usually adopted by Bhagavan. As you can see in this, the role of Ishvara is not prominent because consciousness alone has become all this, and that consciousness is not separate from the truth of oneself. Which is why this way of understanding and approaching one's sadhana is more germane and easier to relate to for someone who has already settled accounts to a large extent with the world of names and forms. So he doesn't have this inner complaint of any kind about the world. If he hears a sentence such as, all this is Ishvara, all this is as per an intelligent being, there is no inner resistance in that person. On the other hand, most of us perhaps would need that healing that comes from relating to our Guru, relating to Bhagavan, relating to Ishvara, perhaps with a form. So that kind of relating to another being is important, because that is the only way our experience of the many is collapsed into the experience of just one other than oneself. And that one becomes one's Guru or Ishvara. And so for many of us, that is like a two-step process to arrive at the non-dual self. But Bhagavan is now referring to those who are very mature, who can directly accept and see the truth of the fact that that one consciousness projects everything, like even in a dream. So the only way we can relate and buy into this idea is to see that I am already experiencing every day such an interesting state called the dream state. And in that dream state, a wonderful magical world of three-dimensional objects is created. Who says we are not artists? Who says we cannot imagine vividly? We are the most vivid imaginators, so to speak. And so that one consciousness, each of us is able to create so many beautiful colors, names, and forms. Perhaps we don't sometimes pay adequate attention to the implication of that out of thin air, literally, our mind is able to project and create, first of all, project, and then it also dwells in that world of objects. And so this amazing faculty, Bhagavan calls it Maya, or from another perspective, avidya. So all of that is an inherent power of the self. And Bhagavan referred to that in the earlier question, which I will just quickly review. The question was that if the entire universe is of the form of the mind, then does it not follow that the universe is an illusion? Since if I imagine something in my mind, that's not really there, correct? Says the disciple. And if that be the case, why is the creation of the universe mentioned in the Vedas? Why is there so much talk of all these lokas, all these deities, and so much of actions, both ritualistic as well as reaching out actions, good actions which are prescribed, and not so great actions which are proscribed or prohibited. So all this talk in the scriptures, why all of that is there, says the disciple. And Bhagavan says, all that is only to draw your attention to the fact that all of this has no independent existence apart from the self. So Bhagavan says, the fact that the creation of the world has been described in different ways, from that fact, it is clear that the purport of the Vedas rests only in teaching the true nature of Brahman after showing somehow or the other the illusory nature of the universe. So that is the purpose we shouldn't lose sight of. One of the most common sources of curiosity for people is what happens after a person dies? Into which world does he go? From where did we come? So these are natural questions, no doubt. And a constructive answer is given by these scriptures. By constructive is meant to play along with the questioner instead of dismissing the very implicit assumption behind that question that all this is an illusion. The scriptures play along with that and give a tentative, provisional answer that there are these 7 higher worlds, there are 7 lower worlds, and based on one's karmas, one goes higher or lower. So all of this is not altogether wrong or invalid. Just as we can say that the sun rises in the east and there is a solar system, there are so many planets, all that is fine. Please note that what the scriptures say is not false. It's just that it is a provisional answer. Once a deeper questioning is done, then even those statements are seen to be not entirely complete in their assertions, that all this is really not absolutely real. But before that, the scriptures therefore are only teaching the illusory nature of all this. And so like Bhagavan would always draw attention to that, because there is no end to the level of questions. So one level of answer is wise to give that. So one level of answer, Bhagavan generally would give one level of stage of answering a question. He'd say, okay, karma is there. You do good actions in a nishkama bhava without too much of obsession about the result, and then offer those actions and the result to Ishvara. So all of that Bhagavan would validate. But then if the person goes on and saying leading questions such as, are there masters looking after the universe or the world, the welfare of the world? Are there different lokas? What is the nature of those lokas and so on? Then Bhagavan quickly sees through the game that the mind is playing of getting diverted into the diversity, getting attracted to all kinds of arcane methods and arcane processes in this world. There is no end to the games that the mind can play. So Bhagavan would just cut them all with the Brahmastra, saying, come back to that self which is asking these questions. Come back to that self which says, I had this magical experience or that sound and lights experience. Well, all that is fine. But unless you arrive at the true nature of what you are, the self, there is no freedom from misery. And that's what you really want, isn't it? So Bhagavan would draw attention to that, directing the questioner away from his preoccupation with very interesting phenomena in the subtle world. So that is why here too, Bhagavan says, therefore, only that is the purport of the Vedas, to show that all this is ultimately an illusion. By illusion is not meant it has absolutely no reality. It means it appears real, but when inquired deeper into it, it comes out as inconsequential. That's a better word. It's inconsequential. Whether you're truly happy and at peace is independent of these names and forms. That's why the Vedas try to direct our attention back to oneself, says Bhagavan. And he goes on to say that the world is illusory, even one cannot directly in the state of realization, which is in the form of experience of one's bliss nature, meaning Ananda Swarupa. That's the original word used. Meaning, Bhagavan says that the fact that you alone are and you are of the nature of fullness and completeness, that itself is a testament to the fact that everything else is not full and complete. It's like even in deep sleep, all these objects get withdrawn, so to speak, into a seed form. It's even as a spider draws into itself the web. Certain spiders do that, not all. So the spider, it is said in the stock example, can project this a web from out of its body, out of its own being. The material of that web is the spider's own being. It secretes this chemical. And it is said that that web has strands which are as strong as steel. If you do a same to same comparison, take a steel strand which is as thin as a spider's strand in the web, and do a same to same comparison of the same cross-sectional area, that spider's web is stronger than steel. The idea here is that something very substantive can come out of that spider, and then it creates this very magical, beautiful web, and again can withdraw it. Certain spiders, I'm told, can do that. So in this stock example told in the Upanishads, we say, Yathavarnanabihi srajate grindhate cha. Just as the spider spins this web out of itself, then again draws it back into its heart. Even so has this entire world come out, so to speak, projected out of that one consciousness, and again withdraws into itself. And even in deep sleep, a similar thing unawarefully happens. Unawarefully, because that avidya is not destroyed there. And so Bhagavan says we can even experience or understand that in the form of experience of one's bliss nature. So once one's own swarupa as fullness is appreciated, even glimpsed, it's much more convincing to say all this world has come out from me. So that's why Bhagavan hints at that, ultimately your dream example is one, your deep sleep example is another way of appreciating this, and then you have your own experience of fullness and completeness, which is an indicator, a cue, as it were, that all this has come out of that fullness and again goes back into that fullness. That is the gist of what Bhagavan said there. Now we will go to the next question, the 11th question today. So the disciple now asks that, okay, this appreciation of the truth, is it really possible for the mind? Because the mind is so limited, and it's also part of the very drama, which is this creation. So the disciple asks, is self-experience possible for the mind at all, whose nature is constant change, he says. So the mind is always changing. It's part of this changeful world. How can the mind grasp, so to speak, the self, which is limitless? So this is a very common and an important question, that can the mind know the self? Because it's part of the drama, it's part of the avidya, right? And so can it grasp the limitless? If the self is limitless, the mind is limited. How can the limited mind grasp the limitless self? Another variation of that same question. So here the disciple asks, is self-experience possible for the mind, whose nature is constant change? And Bhagavan says, since sattva guna, the constituent of prakriti, which makes for purity and intelligence, is the nature of the mind, and since the mind is pure and undefiled like akasha, what is called mind is in truth of the nature of jnanam. It is jnana swarupa, says Bhagavan. When that mind stays in the natural pure state, it has not even the name mind. It is only the erroneous knowledge which mistakes one for another that is called mind. What was originally the pure sattva mind of the nature of Shuddha Jnanam forgets its Jnana Swarupam on the account of nations or avidya, and it gets transformed into the world under the influence of tamas and under the influence of rajas. So Bhagavan says, therefore, do not think that the mind is necessarily always this limited entity grasping and reaching out for various things in the world, getting affected by the world. Not so. When the mind is viewed in its truthful nature, it is jnana swarupam. That is the word Bhagavan uses. That the mind inherently is of the nature of sattva. Sattva is one of the three gunas of nature. So Bhagavan is using here the standard model, so to speak, of the entire universe, where this entire universe is a play of three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And so the mind, it is said, partakes of the nature of sattva, with which a certain amount of rajas and tamas is mixed. So especially the mind of the jiva, it is said, is malina sattva, implying that the sattva which is predominant in the mind, when it comes to the jiva, there is some admixture or contamination, if you like, of tamas and rajas, which is that is the cause of samsara, cause of suffering. Otherwise, the mind inherently, if it were to come back and get rid of the tamas and rajas, at least to a large extent, it's much easier for that mind to be seen and understood in its true nature as a self. So Bhagavan is actually much more categorical. He says, if the mind comes back to its true nature, it is the self, jnana swarupam alone, because it is of the nature of akasha. It is undefiled. So when the akasha has these, good and bad smells, as they say, all of them come and go, but the akasha or space is untouched. And if those smells go away, the space just resumes its normal, pure nature, which was always what it was. And so Bhagavan says, when that mind stays in that natural state, it has not even the name mind. It's only by way of courtesy. We say that it is mind. So when that mind resumes its true nature, it's no longer mind. It's identical with the self. Even Sri Ramakrishna, one of the respected Mahatmas of recent times, used to say, Shuddha Man, Shuddha Buddhi, Shuddha Atma Ek. So he used to say that the pure mind is the self alone. You cannot draw a distinction between the pure mind and the self. They're the same, he used to say. So it is only erroneous knowledge. So when there is erroneous knowledge, then alone the mind gets into all kinds of messes and creates the suffering. Otherwise, the self alone. So therefore, the corollary is, there is nothing surprising in the mind being the locus where knowledge takes place. Okay? Mind is the locus. It is the platform where knowledge happens. And that knowledge happens, as Bhagavan later explains, when tamas and rajas get reduced or relatively become very, very minimal in the mind through karma yoga, through offering the actions to the Lord and so on, then that mind becomes capable of generating or capable of fostering the vritti called aham brahmasmi. So Bhagavan says later on that pure mind is able to clearly reflect its own true nature. It's no longer mind. It becomes one with that very nature through that vritti, as Bhagavan goes on to explain that. So then he says, what was originally the pure sattva mind of the nature of knowledge forgets its knowledge on account of nations, gets transformed into the world on account of the tamoguna, and being under the influence of rajoguna, imagines I am the body, the world is real, and then acquires consequent papa and punya through raga, dvesha, etc. And then through the vasanas attains birth and death. So that's a long statement there. So what Bhagavan says is that mind which is of the nature of sattva, because of this rajas and tamas, which are extraneous to its nature, acquires papa punya, says I am the body, I am the doer, and then goes on doing all kinds of things, acquires the vasanas, the tendencies to do more and more of these things, and then attains birth and death. So it goes through the transmigratory cycle, as they say. But that mind which has got rid of its defilements through action without detachment, which is action without attachment, my apologies. So through action without attachment, performed in many past lives, this mind listens to the teaching of the scripture from a true guru, that's what's known as Shravanam, reflects on its meaning, that is Mananam, and meditates in order to gain the natural state of the mental mode of the form of the self, that is Aham Brahmasmi, which is the result of continued contemplation of Brahman. So to put it simply, Bhagavan is validating the traditional way of arriving at Brahmajnana. Okay? You don't actually get Brahmajnana as an addition to your biodata. I have so much knowledge, then I have one more knowledge for Brahmajnana. It is not like that. Brahmajnana dissolves all your past knowledge, so to speak. It erases any kind of identification with all that you had regarded yourself to be. In that sense, it's the way you might take a magic slate. I'm sure all of you know what a magic slate is. So these children are given these magic slates in which they can write and scribble various things. And then they just lift that paper or that sheet above, out of the surface, and all that is written gets erased in a jiffy. Even so is this vritti called Aham Brahmasmi vritti, which erases all that the mind has seen and gone through and calls its own, all its past knowledge of the world, its experiences, its drama, all of that gets negated by this Aham Brahmasmi vritti. Excuse me. So the key thing here is how Bhagavan validates that first is the action done without attachment. By that, the raga dveshas are attenuated. It's not easy to keep doing what one has to do, irrespective of whether I like it or not. So once a person has some clarity that this is what I should be doing, but it's not very pleasant, I still stay put with doing that. That's karma yoga. That's a very great and important aspect of the sadhana. Not easy for anyone to hang on there in spite of the challenges in a given situation. And then incidentally, the situation will change for one's benefit when one has the deeper desire for self-inquiry. These roles we play in our life, slowly they get reduced. That is definitely going to happen. That is the assurance of Bhagavan. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja, as Bhagavan in Krishna in the Gita says. So the more one is able to do these roles honestly and offer those results to Bhagavan without running away from those roles, then magic of magic, slowly those roles start leaving you off their own accord. Or you may have to do a minor choice. There will be a crossroads in your life. You take very naturally, you take one crossroad which leads towards Bhagavan. So that is the kind of assurance that the gurus are giving us. And they therefore say, do not go along with your raga and dvesha, attachment and aversion, and make choices in your life of either going towards one action or running away from one action. So without attachment, if these actions are done in many past lives, so it's not in a jiffy. But having said that, those who have already come to Bhagavan already have the ruchi for Advaita. For sure, there is so much of carry forward of punya from the past. So it's not at all the idea here that we should imagine, I will take many lives to come to Advaita. That's not true at all. One can attain at least a glimpse of the final truth of Advaita here and now in this very Janma. And then that glimpse can become your reference point, so to speak, meaning you know what is the direction to take. You no longer have any big doubts about sadhana or about Bhagavan. The whole path becomes so clear. That is for sure attainable here and now. And you no longer look forward to some magical experience. That is also possible here and now. So you reach a point which can be called the vritti jnanam, which is you get a clear glimpse of what the self is. But no doubt that becomes now the basis for your sadhana. You're not claiming to be a Jivan Mukta, but Bhagavan would say that that becomes the basis for Brahma Dhyana. He calls it contemplation of Brahman, continued contemplation of Brahman. So therefore, this is like a map of one's entire life journey. Bhagavan has succinctly given in such a small but very important paragraph in this book. The question 11, you can make a note of that and carefully read sentence by sentence later if you do find the opportunity. The 11th question where Bhagavan therefore validates the entire traditional unfoldment of Advaita, and because he himself is that accomplished Sadguru, which is greatly prized in the Advaita tradition. It's not easy to come to somebody like Bhagavan, so clearly giving that nuanced truth of Advaita without being preachy about it, without giving a formula which kind of works for some, doesn't work for another. Instead, Bhagavan is so dynamic in his teaching. He doesn't try to give too many do's and don'ts, trying to say, you should do this, you should do that. He merely suggests this is what you may want to do, then silently conveys his grace. So such a guru is an extremely great, a consequence of great punya over many lifetimes. And so having come there, listens to the teaching of the scripture from a true guru. So that is what we are doing. And even dwelling upon this, we are dwelling upon the teaching of Advaita from the guru. Remember, when you think of Shravanam or the study of the Shastra, that doesn't mean you pore over books, as I am often fond of mentioning. That it refers to opening your mind to the teaching of the Guru. The words of the Guru become your guideline. They directly dissolve avidya. So the words of the Guru do this magic of directly resolving the avidya, which makes us attached to the mind and the world, which makes us unable to shift one's attention from the content of consciousness to that consciousness. So the Guru's words help us sift these two things. One, the content of what I experience. Two, that light in the light of which all this is being experienced. So Bhagavan's words come back, take us back to that source, that screen on which these experiences of your life are occurring. So as you resolve into the words of Bhagavan, you become more and more confident and clear. Whatever is happening cannot touch the truth about me. Whatever is happening is no doubt a part of some karma process. Let it be what it is. I stay rooted in this teaching of Bhagavan that the self is non-dual. I see through the bluff of raga and dvesha. What is raga? Subjectivity, excess subjectivity about something. I see something, I superimpose more value on it. That is called raga. Dvesha, I see something, I see it as an object of hatred. It need not be an object of hatred. It can be unpleasant. Okay, I stay away. That's fine. But I instead superimpose a lot of negativity on it. That is called dvesha. So this raga and dveshas cloud the mind. And through focusing on the words of the Guru, we are able to sift through what is true, what is not true. It's a great blessing, therefore, to do what Bhagavan mentions here as listen to the teaching of the scripture from a Sadguru. True Guru is what the English word is. Bhagavan has said Sadguru in the original Tamil. Then he reflects on its meaning. This is known as Mananam. So Mananam is to reflect on what the Guru has said. Why is the reflection required? Because we might say, yeah, what the Guru says is fine. Well, that's superficial. Okay. So there are so many questions which are floating around in the background of our mind. So our mind is not easily going to surrender to the words of the Guru. If we do that, nothing like it. But then there are certain thoughts, certain questions, certain objections, if you like, to that teaching of the Guru. And so therefore, there's going to be a certain clash, so to speak, between the teaching of the Guru, the words of the Guru, and what my mind is saying. No, it can't be. It's the way most students would say. I'm giving a typical example. They might say, Bhagavan says that all that exists is the self. I understand, but I have this problem in my life. So, the but essentially negates to a certain extent all that was said before. And so therefore, we can be honest and put it a little different. We can say, I understand Bhagavan says all that is the self and I'm untouched and so on. And I'm also, and use the word and instead of using the word but. Okay. And I'm also seeing these challenges in my life, which are so difficult, which prevent me from appreciating the truth. Don't say but, just say, and also I have these challenges. Now, how do I face them in the light of the teaching? That's a very constructive way of saying it. Never use the word but when we refer to the words of Bhagavan or any of our respected gurus, because immediately the mind is playing the game of negating all that was said by way of the Guru's words. So no longer the Guru's words have anything more to add to your understanding. That becomes the implication there. So always say, I understand Bhagavan said this, and I also have these challenges which make it very difficult for me to appreciate, keep sight of the teaching and reconcile these two. We can say that it's not easy to reconcile the words of Bhagavan with my lived reality. I have to be honest about that. I don't want to be in denial. If I have so much distress in my mind, I'm honest. I have to accept that. And then I try to bring in the teaching of Bhagavan, saying, this is the astra. These are my weapons. The words of the Guru are my astras, my weapons by which I can cleave through this misery, cleave through these problems. With that spirit, when we approach it, it's called mananam, okay? Reflecting on the words or of the Guru, reflecting on the meaning. So in the tradition, we say tarkataha tarkataha nischaya. So whatever tatparya nischaya, whatever is arrived at through shravanam, you do tarkataha. Through logic, you try to negate the samshayas. Tarkataha samshaya nivritti, can say. And meditates in order to gain the natural state of the mental mode of the form of the self, of the form I am Brahman, which is the result of continued contemplation of Brahman. So here, the something very important is told here in the sense that for many of us, when Bhagavan's words are heard, dwelt upon, read, studied, or even through any of the other sources, they effect a deep change at some level in our mind. And in our very best moments, we figure, everything falls in place. Everything looks fine. For the moment, I don't seem to have any complaint about the world. All is in order. So whenever those moments come, when you experience all to be in order, when you do not want the world to be any different, even if there are a few glimpses of that, recognize that those are the moments when the mind is not obstructing the truth of what you are. So the mind at that point is working fine. It's working fine, actually. It's working as it should be, not obstructing the truth that Aham Brahmasmi. So whenever you even get these crumbs, so to speak, of Ananda, these small little bits of happiness anywhere in your life, instead of saying, I experienced a little happiness, just in your word, verbalize in a different way and it becomes sadhana. How do you verbalize? You verbalize, if at all you verbalize saying, in these moments, at this moment, I am with myself. I see what I am truly. Don't say I experience something, even the self. Never use the word I experience the self. It may be there in contexts, but what it implies is I am the self. Okay, you don't experience the self like another object out there. So these moments when your mind is little resolved, these moments when you are with nature, you're looking at the child's beautiful little eyes of an innocent child, or you're with someone who has a lot of understanding and love and affection for you, all those moments evoke what you are truly. They become nididhyasanam. If you were to look at those moments not as just experiences which come and go, instead look at those very moments as moments of nididhyasanam. I am with the self, which is what it is. These moments, the mind is not obstructing that jnanam. The mind is behaving itself. So just recognize that. It's like even seeing yourself in a true mirror. What's a true mirror? A true mirror will not distort what is in front of it. On the other hand, a mirror in an amusement park is going to have all these funny faces it shows with your face in all kinds of distortions. So that's not a true mirror. So that's like the mind with rajas and tamas. It's like a park, a mirror in an amusement park. And if we take the reflected face in that to be one's true self, it will cause a lot of angst and distress. And instead, like I said, this nididhyasanam, the result of continued contemplation of Brahman, you can tap into that when those moments when your mind behaves like a true mirror, reflecting what you are without distortion. Okay, that is the continued contemplation of the nature I am Brahman. This thus will be removed the mind's transformation into the world in the aspect of tamoguna, and it's roving therein in the aspect of rajoguna. So Bhagavan again resumes that thread of discussion, saying that, look, what you're calling the mind, what you're calling the world out there, is this very self. With Sattva-guna is the pure mind, with Rajoguna becomes the mind as a doer, as an enjoyer, and I have to go and get those desires fulfilled. And I have these desires, and then I will act and accomplish those desires. All of that is Rajoguna. Then the world outside, the objects, the stones and the stalks and the mountains and the plants and the trees, all of that is with the Tamoguna predominance. That same self, therefore, with these three gunas, is able to explain all that you experience. It's like a grand unified theory, so to speak, whereby all that you experience can be resolved into the self. And that is why this is not just science, okay? So in science, at the end of the story, you're left with the same miserable, I am small, that avidya doesn't go away, no matter how much the quantum physicists are able to go on talking about unity and consciousness. So because they are not able to understand the resolution of this entire universe into the self at a very clear level. So this very model Bhagavan presents of three gunas alone with consciousness give rise to this world. Tamoguna is inert objects outside. Rajoguna, I am the doer, I am the experiencer. Rajas implies action. Rajas implies strong identity of doership, of enjoyership. And then Sattva Guna, contemplation, what I am, I look within. And when that Sattva Guna becomes predominant, the mind dissolves into the self. No longer is mind. The word mind becomes just a formality. It's no longer really any mind anymore. It's just the self, says Bhagavan. And so Bhagavan wraps up that part of what he answers, saying, when this removal of defilement, the removal means when the removal of the defilement from the mind takes place, the mind becomes subtle, sukshma, and unmoving, achalam. It is only by the mind that is impure and is under the influence of rajas and tamas that reality, which is a self, which is very sukshma, subtle and unchanging, that is not experienced. Just as a piece of fine silk cloth cannot be stitched with a heavy crowbar, or as the details of subtle objects cannot be distinguished by the light of a lamp flame that flickers in the wind. So Bhagavan is giving the example. Why is it that the mind can normally not just illuminate or help us arrive at the self? Why does the mind obstruct? So he says it's very subtle, sukshma. So that it requires a steady, quiet mind. Only then the self is able to be appreciated as in the mind. So the mind becomes resolved as the self. At other times, Bhagavan gives the analogy, a piece of fine silk cloth cannot be stitched with a heavy crowbar. The crowbar is so gross and thick in cross section, it cannot stitch a silk cloth. So even so, therefore, that mind with rajas and tamas will not be able to appreciate the self as its nature. But in the pure mind that has been rendered subtle and unmoving by the meditation described above, the meditation described above was of appreciating through the words of the Guru, through the contemplation, that I am Brahman. And so until that mind has been rendered subtle and unmoving by that meditation, only then the self bliss will become manifest. That means the Atmananda becomes manifest. So remember one thing here, whenever we say that bliss is of the nature of the self, we shouldn't imagine that there is some special experience of bliss which kind of suddenly comes up in a very special state of experience. In fact, that self which is of the nature of bliss is like the light that will illuminate both outer sorrow and both outer joy. So whatever is going on in the mind is both illuminated by the self which is of the nature of bliss. So this is a subtle point here. The idea is this. Instead of saying that the self is another separate bliss of the kind of the various types of bliss that I experience, it is more correct to say the self is all bliss. Any bliss you experience is the bliss of the self alone. Any bliss, even if you experience bliss in, let's say, watching a sporting event on television, is the same bliss of the self alone that is temporarily manifesting. And because we are unaware, we might become dependent on that. we superimpose the bliss, which is of the nature of the self, on that external object. So that's where the mistake happens. It is said, therefore, that when the jnani experiences bliss, he doesn't run after it. He says, oh yeah, that's not a big deal. It's just me. So even the greatest external happiness, let's say a jnani gets by his karma or prarabdha, well, it says, that's not a big deal. It's just what I am. So on the other hand, a person who doesn't have that knowledge feels, that is so blissful. That object is such a great source of happiness. And conversely, he will run away from objects that seem to not give him any outer happiness. But so therefore, when we say that the self is of the nature of bliss, we should remember all bliss you experience is a reflection of the self alone. It's just that when you are aware of it in contemplation, you see the truth of the statement. You see the truth of the statement that the self is of the nature of bliss. That's all there is that happens in meditation. That in Dhyanam, that Aham Brahmasmi, without any external dependence, that Ananda is manifest. It is what we call Swarupananda Avirbhava. That nature of the self, which is of the nature of Ananda, becomes manifest in the mind during contemplation. So no doubt it's a wonderful thing, but not to be confused as one more in the hierarchy of blisses that you have. And then Bhagavan goes on to say, as without the mind, there cannot be experience, it is possible for the purified mind endowed with the extremely subtle mode or vritti to experience the self-bliss by remaining in that form, that is as the form of Brahman. Then that one self is of the nature of Brahman will be clearly experienced. So whenever, like I said, this word experience is used, you should remember, it implies the mind is just getting out of the way. Normally, the mind is distorting what is the truth of yourself. And in contemplation, it stops doing the distortion. So what is your nature as Ananda? It is able to manifest in the mind. So the mind becomes quiet and reflects the self as it is. That's what is meant by experiencing the self and so on. Otherwise, we start imagining, I have to experience the bliss of the self. Not so. You're already experiencing the bliss of the self. Whenever you experience any Ananda, that's the bliss of the self alone. And it's just that with your eyes closed, if you're able to recognize, I'm peaceful and blissful without any external objects, that's wonderful. That's all that is sought here. Not another extraordinary mystical kind of an experience. That's not the idea. So this is what Bhagavan answered, saying, can the mind, whose nature is constant change, experience the self? So to summarize, therefore, we should recognize that the pure mind is not separate from the self. The mind is of the nature of Sattva Guna, and when Rajas and Tamas are a little minimized, for sure, that vritti or mental mode, as they say in English, that vritti meaning modification of the mind, will definitely be possible, whereby the mind is known to be non-different from the self in its true nature. So that's why Bhagavan says, when the mind has sattva in its predominance, it is only called mind by way of courtesy. It's not really mind anymore. It is a self alone, which is why every single thing that you do in your life is, I do this, I do that, or I experience this object, I experience that object. But in contemplation and self-inquiry, there's a small difference. See the close difference here? In contemplation, as per Bhagavan's words, what happens is, you don't say, I experience the self, you say, I am the self. I am that. You don't say, I did this, I did meditation. Maybe you can do that for japa. When you repeat a mantra, you say, yes, I did mantra repetition. That's a very fair statement. But when it comes to contemplation and self-inquiry, you cannot really say, I did self-inquiry, because that very doer is getting resolved there. So we might use the statement, all right, but it implies it cannot be taken literally. You never do self-inquiry. You only allow self-inquiry to happen, and then the mind resolves as the self. Okay? There's a subtle difference. So always say that in self-inquiry, you appreciate I am that non-dual self. You don't say I experience a non-dual self. Even if that statement comes here and there, it is contextual. You should take it as only a courtesy, because the self is not another object like any other object which you experience other outside of yourself or apart from yourself. So the self is the very nature of what you are. So which is why you should be very careful when you see words like bliss or the self is the nature of ananda and I experience the self. These words you should be little careful, because it implies that the self is something different from what you are now. Instead, you are always that self. So that we should bear in mind. So with this, we will just read the next question and then we can maybe stop for today. Is the effort, this is the 12th question, is the aforesaid self-experience possible even in the state of empirical existence for the mind which has to perform functions in accordance with its prarabdha, the past karma which has begun to fructify? So he says, is the aforesaid self-experience, this aham brahmasmi, that vritti or mental mode or modification, is it even possible in the state of regular worldly life, as they say, empirical existence? Or does one need to, take off and leave everything and give up all one's regular activities? Only then this, vritti or experience, so to speak, of the self happens, is the question. Because the mind which has to perform functions in accordance with its prarabdha. So the disciple feels he has a lot of prarabdha and he has to do many roles. Can I really get this, whatever self-experience, the Atma Anubhava? So Bhagavan says, a Brahmin may play various parts in a drama, yet the thought that he is a Brahmin does not leave his mind. Similarly, when one is engaged in various empirical acts, there should be the firm conviction, I am the self, without allowing the false idea, I am the body, etc. to arise. If the mind should stray away from its state, then immediately one should inquire, oh, we are not the body. Who are we? And thus one should reinstate the mind in that pure state. So Bhagavan assures each one of us, no matter what we are, which situation we are in life, this self-inquiry is certainly possible. You can keep drawing yourself back ever so frequently as you do the roles you play. Even as an actor in a play can temporarily play that role, but he doesn't lose sight of what he is. A joke told by one of my gurus was that Amitabh Bachchan is a famous actor. He might play the role of a rickshaw puller or of a coolie, a porter in a railway station, but who has no money in his bank. But even when he plays the role, inside he knows that he is a millionaire or he is a very rich person. So that knowledge doesn't go away, even though there is a lot of, let's say, method acting involved, where you summon up all those emotions and play the role with full gusto. Even then, deep inside, that knowledge doesn't leave you, that I am the self, this is just a role I play. So on the strength of the Guru's words, one can assert that. One can do oneself. You don't assert it to others. To others, you just play the role. But to yourself inside, you assert that role on the strength of the Guru's words. When I say on the strength, it means the Guru is giving this assurance. You have to just verbalize internally, I am that self, and be honest with the emotions and allow what happens to happen. And you are trying to be with those teachings. So that is itself a wonderful sadhana. It's certainly possible, says Bhagavan, that firm conviction, I am the self, without allowing the false idea to arise. So in other words, many of these roles don't need you to accept, okay, I am the mind, the body, I am so much interested in all this. You don't have to do all that. You can play the role even while inside you retain this awareness that I am, that's non-dual self. So Bhagavan is saying, no excuses. Don't say that, oh, I have so much prarabdha, I have to do all this. Well, maybe to some extent you're out of lifestyle, you cannot change it instantly. That's fair. But no excuses for trying to retain that conviction inside that I am the self, says Bhagavan. That inquiry, who am I, is the principal means to the removal of all misery and the attainment of the supreme bliss. So that is the preamble of Bhagavan. That self-inquiry, who am I, is the principal means to the removal of all misery. So it's not some luxury we are indulging in. It's not something which we can deprioritize, because that self-inquiry alone gives freedom from misery. and the attainment of supreme bliss, which is what everybody wants in any case. So therefore, Bhagavan says, how can one even stop doing the self-inquiry or not give it a priority? Because that's what we are all seeking, that attainment of ananda and freedom from dukkha. And so therefore, this self-inquiry can for sure be done in every situation. One can take the first step, dedicate that 24 to 48 minutes every day, no matter what, to this self-inquiry. If that proves tough, then do start with some japa, start with the omkara. So there are so many different graded sadhanas which one can do. And for sure, if we take one step forward, Bhagavan, they say, takes 10 steps towards us. So one should never give way to any kind of despondency. Just start with a few minutes of any sadhana, then try to a little bit expand it. It works wonders, because all these sadhanas, self-inquiry, even japa, mantra repetition, they work at a subconscious level. You don't have to know its effect. It's not like a medicine you take, you immediately get a freedom from some symptom. So it works at a subconscious level. And you have to trust the words of the Guru, never letting go and stop the sadhana which you're doing. So no matter what your situation or prarabdha, Bhagavan says, keep up that conviction and give that time to that sadhana. And that's very important. So with this, we will maybe conclude today's session. In case there are any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, we will again meet in the next session to continue dwelling upon these precious words of Bhagavan. Is a gift to all of us, giving that very essence of all the Shastras. And we are in touch with the deepest teaching of the Vedas and Upanishads when we delve well on Bhagavan's words. So let us gratefully pay our homage to Bhagavan and end this session. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you. Anuragji, you can please take over. Anuragji, I request you to spotlight the Ramanashram Delhi Ramana Kendra video.
Yes, sir. I'm just doing that. Narayanji, please share that one of the Narayanji?
Yes, sir. அருணாச்சலவரத்தேற்ற அக்ஷரமணமாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் அருளி காப்பாயே. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறறுப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா. அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் முற்று அபிநமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகம்புகுந்தீர்த்துன் அககுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆருக்காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி அகிலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்த பூனை ஏன் நினைப்பித்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னையின் பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று உளம்பிடா உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கி உன்னழகை காட் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திப்போ என்னை களவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போது அகத்தில் நீலையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவனாம் உன்னை ஒளித்தேவர் வருவார் உன் சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஓங்காரம் பொருள் உப்புயர்வில்லை முனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா ஔவை போல எனக்குன் அருளை தந்து ஏனை ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமண மாலை வாழி धूपार्थं समर्पयामि दीपार्थं समर्पयामि प्राणाय स्वाहा वाणी स्वाहा व्यानाय स्वाहा वाणी ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः ओम भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सौदर्ववर्ण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसवितप्रस्व सत्यं दर्शन प्रसंजामि अमृतसूर्यं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ओम व्यानाय स्वाहा उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः राजा ओम नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय नमः पुरंड कदलीपழं गोसीरं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपचारसूत्रावसं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि पूगीवल समायुक्तं नागवल्ली तलयुक्तं कर्पूर्ण सूर्ण संयुक्तं प्रतिष्ठां कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रमण महर्षिकी समर्पयामि यो वां पुष्पं वेद पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पद्मान् भवति चन्द्रमा वां पुष्पं पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पद्मान् भवति ओम तत् ब्रह्मा ओम तत् वायु ओम तत् आत्मा ओम तत् सत्यम ओम तत् सर्वम ओम तत् पुनर्नमः अंतर्जलि भूतेत गुहायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वमेकदत्तं वसत्कारकं इन्द्रत्तं रुद्रत्तं विष्णुत्तं ब्रह्मत्वं प्रजापति ओम तथा बोधोतिर्त्वं पूर्वस्वरं न कर्मणा न प्रजयादने नित्यानैके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नीतं गुहायं विप्राजते दत्तदेयो विसन्धि वेदांत विज्ञान से नित्यदार्थ संन्यास योगातदय शुद्ध सत्वा ते ब्रह्मलोके तु पराम काले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे तारं विभावं परमेश्वभूतं यत् पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्य जगं सदं तत्रावित्तकर्मकवनं विशोगत् तस्मिन् यदन्तद्वादित्यं यो वेदादो स्वरप्रकृतो वेदान्तसत्यप्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परतमहेश्वरः मंत्रपुष्पं रमण महर्षिक्यं मंत्रपुष्पं कात्याय दुर्गायको वंडी देवालय सुब्रह्मण्य स्वामीनाथन दक्षिणामूर्ति नटराज भैरव नंदी महेश्वरक्कु समर्पयामि ओम तत्सर्वज्ञार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम तत्र कृतानि च कानि तानि विगच्छन्ति पदे पदे